Good evening and welcome to TDM Talk Show. Recovery is gaining steam. Macau's gaming industry saw a 16% year-on-year jump in revenue, extending the industry's winning streak for a ninth consecutive month. However, some questions still loom large regarding the sustainability of the rebound and the road to 2020 and 2022, when the gaming concessions and sub-concessions are due to expire. To delve into these matters, we are joined by Ben Lee. He's a Macau-based gaming expert and managing partner of iGamix, a gaming consultancy company. Ben Lee, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me back again, Jose.
Are we back to the good or old days when the sky seemed to be the limit?
We are not back to the days when the sky is the limit. I believe the lessons have been learned from 2012, 2013, when we thought the skies were the limit. China, at that time, did not want us to grow uncontrollably. And to this day, there's no reason why to believe that they have changed their mind otherwise.
What about the rationale behind the recovery? 9 straight months, of course, after over 2 years of year-on-year drop in gaming revenue. But what's driving this recovery, the propeller?
Well, interestingly, it was a confluence of 2 different factors that gave us this recovery. They relate to means and motives. The first is the means, in that with a couple of the small junket operators in early 2016 experiencing difficulties, their investors, we believe, fled from the smaller junket operators and towards the bigger junket operators, a flight to quality, you could say. And that in turn gave the more stable, larger junket operators the liquidity on which they could then springboard their business. Now, that's the means. The motive came from the opening of the first casino project in Cotai, which is the Wynn Palace. So, in the absence of any new properties over the last couple of years, the Wynn Palace opening was the driver for a resurgence of interest by the VIP players to come back to Macau and play. So essentially it did 2 things. One, it attracted customers and players that haven't been in Macau for a long time. And secondly, the junket operators were able to go out to those customers, legacy players we call them, and basically say, look, Mr. Wong, you haven't been to Macau for a long time. We've got a brand new property opening up in Cotai. How about you come and play, and guess what? I will lend you credit. I'll give you credit for you to come over and play. So,
but the reason why, let's say, for instance, Mr. Wong hadn't been to Macau, wasn't it also related to political factors, to the anti-corruption campaign in the mainland, and the knock-on effect that it had on Macau?
Absolutely. And, the first couple of years of that, late 2012, 2013, and 2014, saw a lot of those players either stop playing in Macau, or they reduce their level of play in Macau, or more interestingly, and this leads to another sub-issue, they hit their frequency of play. So if they came 6 times in a year, for instance, if they came from Guangdong, they would probably play 2 or 3 times in the VIP room, and the other 3 times in the so-called premium mass room. So they hit their frequency of play, they hit their volume of play. But in 2016, last year, what we saw was the beginning of Chinese activity outside of Macau. So we saw the Chinese police go to the Philippines and basically acted on the Chinese nationals who were operating online casinos, who are operating illegal casinos in the Philippines. We also saw Chinese police acted hand in hand with Cambodian police in the port city of Sihanoukville in Cambodia 3 times, possibly 4 times now, to basically arrest and send all these Chinese engaged in illegal activity back to China. So the word got out that it's no longer safe to play outside of Macau. And by the way, we also heard of in Singapore that the mainland Chinese government approached Singapore and asked them for details and information of Chinese players in the casinos there. The Singapore government actually declined. But we heard that a couple of Chinese undercover police were detained by one of the casinos for trying to obtain information about Chinese nationals in the casino. And we heard similar in Australia. So you put all that in a bigger picture, and the bigger picture is that the mainland Chinese have moved on from Macau to the surrounding jurisdiction. And Vegas did not escape that either. All right, and that in turn basically led to a slowing down of activity outside. And eventually when Macau opened up and the means were there, these Chinese came back, they tried, they found that it was no longer an issue. They felt safe again. And slowly that momentum, as that resurgence of interest gained momentum.
But the question is, why wasn't it no longer an issue? I mean, it was an issue.
Correct.
Being in Macau was something for some of these high rollers, something that could be seen as a bit toxic. Not so much now. There must be a reason why.
Well, two things. I suppose the focus by mainland China on the private entrepreneurs who were connected with local mayors, provincial governors, that focus have shifted to a higher tier. That focus have shifted to, we saw action taken against PLA, senior members of PLA. We've seen action taken against, within the highest tiers of the Beijing government itself. So I suppose, that in itself lent credence to the fact that, well, look, they're no longer concerned about us. Now, couple that with the fact that, the sort of whales that we used to see in Macau would come in and lose 100 million, 200 million, 300 million. They're no longer here. They no longer play in Macau. So
where are they?
Good question. That is an interesting question. They may have gone to online betting. They may have gone proxy betting. But they're certainly not in the big jurisdictions like Vegas or Australia or Singapore anymore. So the smaller guys have felt safe, again, because there is a noticeable lack of prosecution or any sort of investigative action conducted against Macau or anything to do with Macau for the last year and a half, 2 years.
So it is definitely a VIP-fueled recovery.
Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. I think the DICJ figures are quite clear.
Before, we used to have, and actually there was some time last year when we had, it seemed that mass market was about to overtake or was overtaking VIP. That's not the case anymore, of course.
Correct. There was 1 month in July 2016 where the percentage of GGR
gross gaming
revenue that was related to mass was higher than VIP. But since then, VIP has regained the momentum to, at the moment, we believe it probably represents about 58, 59% of GGR versus mass table, not including slots.
That goes against the much anticipated or wanted by many officials, or that was the narrative that, we got to focus on mass, and the restructuring of the gaming industry will imply mass market taking over VIP. That would be healthy for the industry's development.
It's very interesting you brought that up, Jose. If we were to look back at every communique, every statement or any public announcement made by any China officials, including the China Liaison Office here, nowhere have they said that they prefer the mass gaming market over the VIP. All they've ever said is, we would like Macau to be diversified. Right? They've never said mass over VIP. In fact, if you think about it, who would you rather lose your money? Your poor working class or to middle class Chinese, or a handful of rich entrepreneurs who have got the sustainable ability to lose that sort of money in this form of entertainment?
But if they are, let's say, government officials, taking money out of the mainland and washing the money here, then laundering the money, I mean.
Absolutely. But as I said last time, if you would have to be a suicidal mainland Chinese government official to come and play in Macau, right? With the eyes, with the presence of investigators here, you would be absolutely crazy if you're a mainland Chinese official to come and play Macau. So Macau right now, as I said, that very top level no longer exists. Any officials who would come here, I would say they wouldn't come to Macau to play. They would go somewhere else. And that's why China have now focused on the other jurisdictions outside of Macau to try and identify those officials who are going elsewhere out of Macau. So Macau, insofar as China is concerned, and our director of the China Liaison Office said that, Mr. Li Gang, as far as they were concerned, Macau has been cleaned of hot money.
Now, but we still have a number of measures. For instance, the latest one, ATM facial recognition for mainland Union Pay card holders. That's the latest one in terms of headlines. Impact of this move, which I think is going to take some time before it does come into fruition. What is your take on this?
This is part of the overall crackdown on capital flight out of China. Unlike certain sell-side analysts who said that this is aimed at the VIP market, and I think this has been corrected by Ambrose So as well as our Secretary for Finance, Lana Leong. It's not aimed at the VIP. The VIPs do not go to the ATMs and tap out $500,000 Hong Kong dollars. It is part of the overall, but the genesis for that action is actually quite interesting. So in the old days, with a UnionPay debit card, you could take any amount out of your account provided you have that cash in there. That amount got lowered to a threshold of about 150,000, we heard anecdotally. So the players would have 5 different accounts in 5 different banks, and therefore he would have 5 different UnionPay accounts. And he would use 5 cards at one UnionPay terminal or one UnionPay retailer. And then China brought in the ID swipe terminal. You remember that? That was to stop and identify the person who would have 5 or more different accounts. So that person who used to have 5 or more different accounts got creative. He would go to his friends, 5 different friends, and said, can you set up a UnionPay account for me to use? I'll pay you, of course. And can I borrow your ID card, right, when I'm in Macau, to take money out from 5 different UnionPay accounts, which are not necessarily linked to me. And so they would use different IDs to swap through UnionPay. And that's why the ATMs will be introduced whereby you have facial recognition technology, whereby if you use somebody's ID card in the ATM and the photo doesn't match the person on the ID card, you're going to be flagged.
Still talking about regulation and coming back to the junket operators, local authorities are stepping up efforts in terms of auditing the junket industry and the junket operators. Actually, this is being carried out. The gaming regulator has hinted that we do have a number of problems. They've audited over 40 junket operators. Some need improvement, there's some flaws, some problems. I mean, what do you see coming in terms of further tightening the belt on junket operators?
I believe it's actually very good for the industry and for the junket component particularly. It forces the junket operators to basically up their performance. It gives the DICJ a better handle on the type of people that are currently operating that space. And what it does is it keeps out the unwanted element, the rogue element of the junket operators that we have seen from time to time. So in essence, it has conferred a lot of credibility and transparency to this casino segment called the junket operations, which in the past have always been described by the international media.
Having a shady background.
Shady and all that. So this is actually a very, very good move for the casino industry.
Like becoming legitimate somehow?
Absolutely.
So do you see like something, no more doors, Canal cases and other kind of situations? I mean, less likely.
Less likely. I mean, it's going to be very hard to stamp out the creativity of some of these people, as we've seen in the case of a UnionPay card, but it will reduce the chances and the likelihood of events like this happening over and over again.
Still talking about the junket operators, there has been a great deal of consolidation. Smaller players were kicked out. That actually, this was a kind of game where it was the survival of the fittest, and others actually were embroiled in some legal cases and are no longer top players. What do you foresee with regards to the junket operators industry? Fewer players, stronger, or what would come out of it?
Absolutely. Fewer players, stronger players.
This is already happening.
This is already happening. So with the increasing regulations imposed by the DICJ, the current junket operators have to employ more and more administrative staff to actually complete the paperwork. I mean, just completing the KYC forms, right, requires probably about 3 or 4 to half a dozen administrative personnel you have to hire. And so the junket operators now have a proper system of governance and administration that the DICJ can step in any time to audit. Now, that means the smaller junket operators, they have to invest a lot of resources into setting up those same systems and procedures before they can operate in this space. So, and usually with this sort of requirement, it is more difficult for them. So yes, the top junket operators are going to become bigger and stronger, but as I said, that's a good thing because it means that that particular segment will be more stable going forward.
And going forward, we have, of course, 2020 and 2022. I'm talking about the date when the current concessions and sub-concessions will expire. And what we know is that, based on the latest comments by the gaming regulator and also the Secretary for Economy and Finance, is that it does seem that we will have a new bidding process and not an extension of the current license or concessions, correct?
Correct.
What's your comment, your reading on this? What does this mean?
Well, as you know, I do consult to a lot of investors. I do consult to the financial community. And I find the narrative that emanates from certain sell-side analysts are very interesting in that they will always try and preserve the story surrounding particularly the American-based operators. Now, anybody in Macau will tell you that the civil law that the Macau government is based on and the legislation that has been approved by the Legislative Assembly expires in 2020. There is no renewal. You know, even the use of the word renewal connotes the implication that, you know, your license will automatically roll over into a new one. It doesn't, right? As we know, the concession at the moment will expire. Now, there is a provision to extend, but it will expire, and the new legislation has to be crafted, and under the civil law which the government is based on, a new round of tender has to be processed.
But theoretically, there could be an extension, 5-year extension or so, a temporary one, right?
Correct. And that's what some of these analysts are now projecting. But let me ask you a question. We know that the first concession will expire in 2020.
Yes.
We have how many years to prepare for it?
Well,
we have, what, 3 more years?
Right.
Why put it off?
We're talking about SJM concession and MGM sub-concession.
Correct. And interestingly, Paulo Chan, our head of the DICJ, he gave a rate...
Inspection
Correct.
Bureau.
He gave a radio interview in Portuguese. I believe it was with the TDM radio, April
Correct.
2016. He was asked exactly the same question, and he said that the process will have to be one of new bidding. And we have 3 years to prepare for it. So the implication is, why put it off when we know it's going to happen?
And then, of course, I mean, it's very hard to throw in any predictions, and there's no crystal ball here. But there's an expectation, I would say, investors, the market would expect the current concessionaires and sub-concessionaires to continue to be the players. They've been investing heavily. They've opened some properties in Cotai.
Yep.
Another couple of properties are in the pipeline, so it does make sense, right?
Well, I say, caveat emptor, buyers beware. You know your original concession is only good for 20 years. And you know after that there'll be a new concession. But coming back, we got to look at what's happened in Macau, and more importantly, what's happening in China. In Macau, we had the bus concessions expire a couple of years ago. Completely new tender, because that's the legal process in Macau. You look into China, there was a recent case where I believe the Shanghai airport duty-free concessions came up for expiry as well. And the process could be a reference point as to how Beijing sees this new process should be in Macau. So I think everybody here believes that unlike the regional concession process, China or Beijing will be very heavily involved in this new round concession in terms of the process, in terms of the decision making at the end of the day.
And would authorities fix the conundrum surrounding the sub-concessions?
I believe
and
so.
the controversy, because we all know that there was a creative approach put forth back then to allow what happened. I mean,
that is absolutely correct. And the most interesting thing is that a lot of people have been asking a question, and I believe the people from the China Liaison Office have been asking the same question: how did 3 concessions become 6? And following from that, how did foreign interests get hold of 50% of them? But coming back to the concession, I'm sorry, I forgot the point of the regional concession.
The sub-concessions, well, would the sub-concessions become fully fledged concessions? Because in practice, they do operate as if they were fully fledged concessions.
Correct. And we've seen many various...
If you look at the contract, the agreements between the concessionaire and the sub-concessionaire.
Correct. Right? And we've got to rely on the local lawyers here who understand the law here better than anybody else from outside of Macau. And they say that there is a problem there, there is an issue, and it has to be fixed. And this new concession is the first opportunity to fix that. However, following on from that, if we are going to fix it's not fixing the legislation, it's actually crafting a new piece, which will then fix the conundrum, as you say. But setting a new legislation actually gives us 3 possible alternative scenarios in terms of outcome. The first is status quo, i.e. 3 concessions, 3 sub-concessions become formalized as 6 concessions. That's one possible scenario. Second scenario is, well, look, seeing as we're going to have to craft a number of concessions at this table, why not force the 3 sub-concessions back into the main 3? Now, how that works out in the end, my team and I, we're still working around that speculation, but that's another possibility. The regional intentions were 3 concessions. Now, if you have sub-concessions that came out of that, perhaps those sub-concessions go back to the concessions and they have service agreements. That is not out of the realm of possibility. The third alternative is, look, And this one has been subject of much speculation amongst the intelligentsia, academic circles, and political circles here in Macau is, why 6? Why not more? Why not have other operators who the governments believe can actually contribute more to the non-gaming element that the Chinese government and Macau government have been talking up for quite some time now, and which still don't seem to be happening.
What about those you were mentioning, the service agreements, the third-party service agreements based on revenue sharing agreements?
Yeah.
Most of these agreements operate under the umbrella of SJM, but not solely, but most of them. And some of them would probably aspire or would like to become fully fledged concessionaires.
Yes.
Well, we know who we're talking about. Yes. Do you see that as a possibility or some?
It's a possibility. You can't rule it out because of those people's connection with the Macau government, and certainly they will put up a strong argument for that possibility. But what I think is more interesting is the possibility that we could actually see the presence of mainland Chinese interests, maybe not directly, but through a local front coming and getting a seat on the table.
That has been something that has been pretty much on the radar, at least it's been hinted by a number of analysts. You see that as a possibility?
Absolutely. It's a strong possibility. Now, 3-4 years ago, the sort of financial companies and people I talked to were mainly Americans, some Europeans, Hong Kong, but not a single mainland Chinese company. But in the most recent 3 years, the amount of Chinese interest have increased exponentially. And we're talking about Chinese-based hedge funds. Now, take a step back, and the casino that I used to operate was Macau Diamond at the old Holiday Inn. That used to be owned by a Chinese state-owned enterprise who had to sell their shares out to my owner at that time because no Chinese companies were allowed to get involved in gaming. Now, you look around the world right now, you look around Asia right now, and the amount of Chinese interest, both private and state-owned, have increased. You look at that Bahama project over in the Bahamas. Who were the contractors and who was the main financier? China State-Owned Construction Company and the China Exim Bank. And who would have become a preferential shareholder of that project? China State Construction Company. You look at around Asia, the amount of interest in Cambodia, in everywhere else, it's always a Chinese bank paired with a Chinese state-owned construction company that are directly getting involved in gaming. So
what you're suggesting is that, well, if this is taking place outside of China, in other gaming jurisdictions, why wouldn't it happen here in Macau, a special administrative region of the People's Republic of China?
I think the base, the foundations is being laid for that. Who is the biggest construction company in Macau right now? Who is involved in most of the casino projects? China Construction Company. So, and who currently owns the former Caesars golf course? We believe it's a Chinese hedge fund behind a Macau company.
So that could be the modus operandi of what is to come.
It could be. Again, these are all possibilities. We're merely speculating. We don't know what the people in Beijing and the Macau government are going to decide at the end. But we actually believe that it's a strong possibility that we could see new entrants to the gaming industry come 2020.
And in the post-2020, post-2022 scenario, while Macau will be dealing with increasing regional competition, actually this has been the case over the past few years and more so currently, and it is set to continue and deepen in the near future. You've been paying close attention and keeping a close eye on what's going on elsewhere in Southeast Asia and also East Asia. In a nutshell, if possible, where's the threat? I mean, in terms of regional competition for Macau?
Well, I gave a
Where is the threat coming from?
Yeah.
And
I gave a recent presentation at a big major banks regional investors conference 2 weeks ago in Singapore, and they asked the same question. It was on the same topic. So I won't call it threats. I'll call it opportunities. The Macau is too concentrated, too focused on China, right? We are not very good at attracting visitors from outside of China. In fact, I don't think any of the casino operators have really invested any dollar in doing so. So that creates a whole lot of opportunity. My favorites are South Korea and Vietnam. The Philippines, yes, they have enjoyed around about a 20+% year-on-year growth, but the bulk of that growth have actually been driven by the local economy, i.e. the local VIPs, and more importantly, foreign and proxy betting by China-facing companies. Korea was a strong contender until March when, because of the THAAD missile issue, China stopped most of the people visiting Korea. So the number of visitors to to Korea fell by 40% in March, and the duty-free sales fell by a similar volume. But that's a short-term issue. We think that will be fixed. And when that issue is fixed, they will resume going back to Korea. Vietnam is an interesting one because of all the potential jurisdiction, it has the one common element with Macau that no other country has. It has a common border with China. It has a shared border whereby the vast tourists, the mass, could come across that border straight into that country. Now, we have one case study, a very small casino in the city of Da Nang, in Quang Nam, in the central Vietnam. That little casino has all the top Macau junket operators there. There are in the vicinity of about 30 chartered flights a week out of China to Da Nang, in addition to commercial flights. That is a hot spot. Now, we are looking at some major projects. So we know that Chata Phuc, Vienna Capital, and Sun City Consortium are looking at have began construction on a $4 billion project called Hoi An South. There are two other projects, one down south in Phu Quoc, which is being developed by one of Vietnam's biggest real estate developer. And there's another project up north in Van Don, again being developed by one of Vietnam's top real estate developer.
Now, one final question regards Hainan's cashless casino. The last time we were here, yes. You were on the show. That was one of the hot topics. Yes. It seems to be pretty much out of the radar. What's going on?
What happened was that when the news report came out, the interview done by Reuters, the Hainan authorities asked the casino, the owner of the casino, to close down for a few months, and then they will let them reopen. And they did. They shut down and they reopened within 2-3 months. And then they operated for several months. Now, there was an expose by one of those TV media from Hong Kong. Nothing happened. It was only because that the owners of that cashless casino got greedy when a couple of players lost way too much, that the authorities finally shut them down and said, no, obviously, this is beyond pale. Having said that, the concept of cashless casinos where you play for points is being revived again. So we are aware of several projects in China and possibly another one in Hainan, but again, it's too early to tell.
Ben Lee, fascinating stuff. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to you at home, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week.